Before
You
we
can take it away.
before we get started, it's a little bit tricky to do the PowerPoint when you're presenting. I just want to make sure I'm presenting correctly. Do you guys all see a blue slide?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Because it's when you have two monitors, it's difficult because I cannot see what I'm presenting. So
Yeah.
okay. So why don't we get started then? I'll just start out with a brief intro for myself, since I haven't met any of you guys here. So my name is Adnan Khan. I'm a principal architect at SPR. My background is in custom dev, enterprise integration, SharePoint, portal, as well as DevOps. Currently, I'm working in the software engineering practice at SPR, and my current emphasis is on Microsoft Azure, as well as leveraging generative AI tools and its applications throughout the organization. So today, we're gonna really outline the impact of integrating AI tools into software development lifecycle. And we will try to cover how AI enhances productivity by automating a number of repetitive tasks, reducing the troubleshooting times, as well as improving test accuracy. So we will make an attempt to present various AI tools, talk about the features rather, tools such as OpenAI ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot, and test management tools, discussing their specific applications and developing things like user stories, coding, and creating test cases. Okay, let's see. All right. So AI tools can be used throughout the software development lifecycle, and each tool has its own benefits and use cases. So we examined a number of tools that cover everything from requirement analysis all the way to monitoring. In this presentation, however, we're gonna primarily focus on requirements, development, and testing tools, but I will briefly touch on design and deployment as well. So for requirement gathering, for example, AI tools can be used to analyze user requirements and feedback from multiple sources quickly. When it comes to design, AI can suggest different design patterns and architectures based on requirements analysis. For example, you can use AI tools to provide different, and that's something I do it a lot when I'm working, for example, a new solution, a new technology, maybe, may not have enough exposure to it. So you can use AI to provide you different architectural solutions with the pros and cons based on the current trends. On the development front, a number of tools like GitHub Copilot that can suggest, just minimize my Teams window. Yeah, sorry, lost my chain of thought. So yeah, different development tools that can essentially provide code snippets and complete functions based on the comments or comments you provide, as well as any partial code examples you might provide. And same goes on for testing tools, both for manual testing and the automation testing. AI generates test cases that based on your code changes and new features. In the area of deployment, AI can help you write your deployment scripts, for example. So let's take a little bit deep dive into three of those areas, like I mentioned: requirement, development, and testing. All right, so creating user stories, right, is really the first step in an agile and Scrum development process. And without, as we know, without proper user stories that outline the user's needs and goals, the development team will end up creating a product that will not meet the user requirements. So how AI can be used now to assist in this ideation and creation of these user stories. So when we evaluated the tools that can help create user stories, yeah, Pat, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, Adnan. Yeah, for anyone not familiar with testing and user stories, can you explain user stories on an kind of a high level?
Yeah, so user story is essentially the way is in its Scrum development process is the way you write your requirements, right? So it's the way your product requirements, and they are generally the traditional way to identify user requirements. Say you generally in the form of a workshop, and the goal of workshop is really to brainstorm and gather as many requirements, aka user stories, as possible from those, from those who need the software product. And really, depending on the size of the project, it's usually a fairly time-consuming exercise. It can take days and sometimes weeks because all the stakeholders are involved. You have to get input from everybody, and based on that, you create your set of requirements, and then you translate that into a sort of what we call in Scrum a user story, which has a certain specific format that can be used to start building starting the software development. So, does that help, Pat?
Yeah, so
Okay.
my understanding of a user story, as I see it, is depending on where you're at in the organization, that will dictate your needs for output from this software. For
Right.
example, reporting is a common function of software. And if you're in the back office, you'll have different reporting needs than if you're in marketing or sales,
Right.
etc. Correct?
Yeah. And then later in the presentation, I have a couple of examples where I show you give you some ideas on how you can use generative AI. But that will also give you an idea on the format of the user story that I'm specifically referring to. So
Great.
yeah, just a couple more slides. I have a couple more some more examples on it. Um, so when we looked at AI tools, right? So we wanted to see we have certain criteria in mind. We wanted to make sure that the results we're getting are accurate, meaning if we provide a scenario, we want to get a very contextually accurate data results. If you ask for, apples and the answer is oranges, that's not what you're looking for. Second criteria, we wanted to see the usability, how easy it is to create those first draft stories, and also how easily you can slice and dice and refine them. And the last criteria is what is the integration capability look like and what is the partner ecosystem look like for that particular product. So with that in mind, we looked at a bunch of products that can help improve the collaboration and communication between the development team and all the stakeholders. So essentially providing a common language and understanding of user requirements. And as I mentioned earlier, the goal was to determine the contextual accuracy, the ease of use, as well as the speed. So the first tool on the left is called Stories on Board. This is more or less a visual story mapping tool, which is ideal for early project planning and understanding the user journey. It's really designed to visually manage and organize stories in a software development project. It has what they call a AI enhanced user story creation, which utilizes AI. And then behind the scenes, it also uses ChatGPT, by the way. The tool itself uses ChatGPT API to really assist in generating detailed user stories, acceptance criterias, and release summaries. Fairly collaborative platform, has a user-centric approach, and also has some nice integration capabilities with your favorite project management tools such as Jira, which these days most people either use Jira or a Microsoft product. Um, some of the things that you have to be uh, watch out for is that it's every time you generate user stories using AI, it most likely you will need some human refinement. So you can't really get away from human expertise. especially when it comes to very domain-specific details, because AI is just, unless you fine tune it, AI is definitely not going to have your domain-specific details. I think there's a question.
Yeah, thank you. Not to take us too much down this path, but
Yeah.
we in the past have talked about it, as well as I have to admit here at the junior college for our licensing, what we have, we're very much big users of Microsoft and Copilot. I'm
Yeah.
curious on this slide as well as other slides if that was considered, kind of seeing OpenAI and ChatGPT, wondering if Copilot would also be an option, or your thoughts on that.
Yes, Copilot is definitely an option. I think Copilot has come a long way since it's first released. Um, I Unfortunately, it's one of those tools where you need to have a certain number of licenses to be able to even have access to it. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance, couldn't get my hands on it, but I played around with the standard Copilot that you get if you have a Microsoft account. Um, and if like if that's something I would compare with, I guess, with OpenAI ChatGPT, not these
Yeah.
specific tools that are user story.
Yes, that makes
Um,
sense.
so for that, I personally like ChatGPT better because the way at least from what I've seen, it remembers what you're talking about. So it remembers the history. So if you go back and ask more questions or ask follow-up questions, it clearly remembers where you came from, and it continues from that point on. From Copilot, I don't know, although they claim to use this, at the end of the day, they use ChatGPT because it's a Microsoft partnership. But somehow, I don't know, for maybe they're using less tokens or whatnot, it felt like it was losing, I don't know, what's the right word, but it was losing the memory.
Yeah.
So it's not keeping the longer history. So I had to kind of repeat myself what I was asking. As well as I think ChatGPT directly, using the paid version, at least, I got more refined answers. So when you're dealing with, when you experiment with things, also recently to answer further, elaborate on the question, um, recently I also experimented with Google Gemini. So that's something that has come a long way since I was not very happy with results with Google Bard, but with Google Gemini, here and there I play around with it. And that also actually, although it's not in the slide, is something that is actually a fairly good tool. Granted, I don't have the paid version, but even the free version, it does produce pretty amazing results. And depends, it's one of those things you have to just, it's hard to describe. You just have to play around. Once you have a scenario, compare the tools, and then sometimes one tool works better than the other. So yeah, so
And
Copilot definitely a good choice, especially if you have the full version.
yeah, and not to continue
Yeah.
down this rat hole, but I found, I find in using lots of different, generative AI. Don't get me wrong, OpenAI ChatGPT is a great tool. Sometimes it's a
Mhm.
function of what your enterprise is licensed and is centered on, right?
Right.
So, for example, in higher ed, we're very centered on Microsoft. We get a lot of licensing for our Microsoft based on our students. Other places
Mhm.
have a lot of Google licensing, right? Other
Yeah.
places have licensed Open APIs. So they're all evolving. They're all amazing, right? So I also find for
Yeah.
others, they might find use what you can and get licensed to, right? And if you can get
Yeah.
licensed to Open API, use it, and get licensed to Copilot. We just very much in higher ed, because we have so much Microsoft licensing, lead a lot with it. But I
Yeah.
think the religion between OpenAI and Copilot and Gemini are all pretty minor. I think it's a matter of what you can get licensed to is probably the biggest
Yeah.
first
And then
impediment.
and keep in mind when you're using Microsoft products, you're behind the scenes using OpenAI products.
Yes, yeah.
Because that's because of the close partnership. It's just Microsoft has a facelift to it, and then they have more specific use for their Microsoft products, right? Whether it's Office products or Office 365 products. Okay, all right. So moving on. So we talked about stories on board. Agile Story again is more user story specific tool. I personally was not overly impressed. create agile story mainly because it not meet my first criteria, where I wanted very accurate, contextually accurate stories. So I felt like they were just not worth it. But it's good for brainstorming if you're in a meeting with business users and you want some ideas, right, on things to talk about while you're gathering requirements. So it can create potential startup ideas from some initial ideas and really helps you document those ideas as well. My problem was I just created too many unnecessary stories that were not specific to scenario enter. So I had to really shift through, find what was really relevant, which to me is just not worth it. And the performance was also very slow compared to other tools. The one on the far right, user story generator, also, I think it felt like to me a fairly half-baked product. It did create some good user stories. Again, it's something that can be used for brainstorming. But I can do the same brainstorming using, you know, the commercial Gen AI tools such as ChatGPT or Gemini. Um, and also I noticed that with user story generator, they were a bit simplistic, the features, and there's not much you can do once you create the stories. You cannot go back and edit it. So my favorite so far has been, and this is one of, user story is one of those markets where there's not a lot of tools, to be honest. Um, so my favorite was by far was the OpenAI ChatGPT, and as well, like Tim, you mentioned, Timothy, that Copilot is also a good option, as well as Gemini. I would recommend trying a scenario and see which one gives you better results. Um, so for ChatGPT itself, I felt that once I provided the scenario, the stories were accurate to the scenario entered. It was able to create ideas, user stories, my personas, my epics, acceptance criterias, um, whatever I asked for it, it was able to create it. And more importantly, it was able to remember what I was asking. So if I go back and ask questions, say it create 10 stories for me. I don't have to repeat my question. I can just say, explain more on number one or create sub-stories for number one. And it knew what number one meant. So it was very easy to work with and refine those stories as needed. Even without providing a very detailed prompt, it followed best practices, agile best practices, meaning the stories were independent, small, testable, and follow the specific format. And at least in my experience, when I compared to other tools such as Gemini, it did produce superior results that were, more user-friendly. As far as integration, well, it has a close partnership with Microsoft, so it really has enabled them to, at least now, a leader in the AI race. So that's pretty much it on these tools. I'd like to briefly talk a little bit about prompt engineering, something I'm sure a lot of you have heard about. Um, to me, it's both an art and a science, and it requires really a balance of the clearly defined parameters and a very creative input. And the goal is to guide the AI toward generating the output you're looking for. And framework, which the slide is showing, prompt engineering framework is really help you create an effective prompt. So it incorporates the principle of prompt engineering to define the input to ChatGPT, for example, for a more tailored and effective output. Essentially, it helps guide the AI to the output you're looking for. The best way to describe it is really through an example. And for example, there is a framework called RDF framework. R stands for you ask the Gen AI to act as a role. Task is you ask it to create a task, and format is showing the results in a certain format. So in the context of user stories, for example, a very simple prompt, again, for the present, for the sake of this presentation, I kept it very simple. But you get the idea, you can make it more complex and you can add more specific user stories and even your documentation in a limited fashion to get the results. So in this case, simple example, You ask the AI to act as a product owner, and you give it a task of creating user stories for the upcoming sprint that focus on enhancing the user interface for the e-commerce platform. The results you want in as a prioritized list in the product backlog with acceptance criteria and story points for each story. So that's a simple example, and with just a simple prompt, right? You're not giving much information to it at this point. You're keeping very generic. But based on that, if you're just at this point looking for ideas, right? You're in very early start of your journey. You look for ideas, and you can get very nice ideas, right? So you get a story about, for example, it actually came up with a lot of stories. I only picked like 4 for this presentation. The first one, it very created a very clear story about intuitive navigation, right? As a shopper, I want to easily navigate the e-commerce platform so I can find products I'm looking for without hassle. So it created a very clear acceptance criteria that, for example, I want to implement a clear and concise top navigation bar. So all of these, it's a very good example of some of the ideas that it's giving you, even with you telling AI a lot of information, and even making an attempt to create a story point, which is actually nothing but defining how complex the work is, right? Is it small, medium, large effort to build this out? User story 2, for example, is an example of an enhanced product filtering, right? I want to filter products by various categories so I can find what I'm looking for, right? Here's acceptance criteria. This is what you need. Acceptance criteria essentially mean that this is what the solution should meet as you're testing it, right? It should provide, for example, multiple filter options, size, color, brand, price, and also, again, providing a story points to indicate what level of complexity it is. Couple more example, right? A story for a quick view for products, as well as a mobile-friendly design. So I think that Pat is kind of answering your earlier question, right? What does the user story look like, right? So this is like a description, as a something, I want to, so I can do something. So that's really the format of the user story. Along with you will have an acceptance criteria, so make it an acceptable story, as well as that's pretty much the nutshell what the user story looks like. So as you can see, right, even with very limited information, it did create pretty useful stories, and then at this point you can refine them as needed. You can ask further questions, and AI does a really good job in following up with the follow-up questions. All right, so I briefly mentioned earlier, right? So does AI really understand the whole picture? Well, not necessarily. It depends on a lot of things. Depends on what you're asking. So for example, AI is not necessarily going to have specialized domain knowledge, um, unless you have more complex solutions, right? With augmentation and fine-tuning, which are, fairly costly endeavors. Um, and then you can think of AI essentially. The way I think of it as a valuable addition to the discussion that really should take place anywhere with the stakeholders. So think of it as another very smart person with a lot of great ideas. Um, and that can also articulate those ideas very well for you. So what really it does is really help facilitate the process and really improve the efficiency um, and how quickly you can come up with those requirements. Okay. So that's pretty much what I want to cover for user stories. The next topic is around code authoring. Gen AI can be used, essentially the coding companions, um, to assist with development. There are a number of things they can do. Generate code, um, write to unit test, maintaining standards, write documentation, identify any bugs, help resolve bugs quickly. The one I use, to me, that's the biggest plus is if you're looking at a large code base and you want to quickly understand what the code does, really helps you. It really explains the code really well. Doesn't matter what language it is. Um, and if needed, it can help. I haven't personally used that feature yet, but it can also translate code with AI into from one programming language to another programming language. So let's take a little bit into it. There are 4 tools that our team looked into it. Personally, I use the GitHub Copilot, so I know a little bit more about it than other tools, but we'll cover briefly each of those tools. So for GitHub Copilot, as the name suggests, is developed by GitHub in collaboration with OpenAI. So as far as integration, it primarily integrates with Visual Studio Code, but does have expanded support for other IDEs through extensions. Capabilities, a lot of capabilities. I'll cover a little bit more in the next slide, but briefly, it can do context-aware code completions. It can generate entire functions based on the comments you provide or previous code context. You can provide a code sample and ask it to ask a question about the code or write some snippet, and it does a very good job at it as long as you provide the complete context. It has a fairly large language support, C#, JavaScript, Python, TypeScript, Ruby, and more. And it's really suitable for developers looking to speed up the coding by auto completing, repetitive tasks or generating code snippets. So really, really nice tool. JetBrains, a similar tool built by JetBrains. You might have heard of them because they build products like IntelliJ IDEA, for example. The difference between the GitHub and JetBrains, the JetBrains works directly with JetBrains suite of products, IDEs. Capabilities are fairly similar, like I said, but it's deeply integrated with JetBrains IDEs. Language support is somewhat limited, Java, Kotlin, and Python, I think. It might be a good product for companies who are using essentially JetBrains products. That's the best way I can describe it. CodeWhisperer by AWS, name suggests, built by Amazon Web Services. It does work with, in addition to AWS Cloud9, it works with Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code as well. Again, similar features, provide code recommendations, generate code snippets from comments, unit tests. It seems to have some additional security and code static features to detect potentially problematic code patterns. It does have support for, I think, all the popular languages like Java, JavaScript, Python. And then it's a good tool for developers working in, I would say, cloud environments, especially those using AWS services. Tab9, I personally don't have much information, but the other developers in the team have looked into it. It's built by a company called Codota, I believe, and it's compatible with a wide range of IDEs, Visual Studio Code, JetBrains, and more. So I think it's got a wide range of support. And then just capabilities, again, similar capabilities, but I think it utilizes machine learning models to provide completion for code based on patterns learned from, numerous code repositories, and also offers a personal AI model tailored to individual coding styles. So I think that's something unique to this tool. And it supports, over a dozen languages. Use cases, I think, is suitable for developers who need more versatile AI assistance across different IDEs. I think each of these tools, I would say, offer unique advantages depending on your own environment and developer's preference. My personal favorite, again, I have a bias toward GitHub Copilot because that's the most popular, and also that's the one I have experience with, but each of those tools have their place. Okay. A little bit more about GitHub Copilot. Lately, I've been using in Visual Studio Code. Um, and so some of the main features is that it is, AI powered coding assistant, right? It provides real-time code suggestions for faster and more efficient coding. Um, it works really well with GitHub Copilot. Sorry, with the Visual Studio Code. It's a pretty nice experience. Let's put it that way. And it really improves your productivity. The time you spend on writing code with those suggestions. If you get stuck on something, you can always ask a question. If you're reading somebody else's code, there's a lot of code. You can ask it to explain the code really well, and it does a great job at it. Um, if you have a set of code and you want to write unit tests, you can highlight the code, and it does, in most cases, does a pretty good job. Um, so I think I'm covering some of that in the next slide. Things like multi-language support, um, and your unit test, and then be able to generate the code documentation. So really, really nice tool, and it really um, not only improves productivity, in my opinion, it also improves the confidence, right? To be able to hit deadlines. A lot of times um, in the past, if you have a unique issue, you would be searching Google or different technology blogs to find the solution. In this case, AI, a lot of times, saves you a lot of the time. And a lot of times it's hours and days of work. So, um, a lot depends on how you use it, to be honest. So, so what I've learned from experience by playing around with this is when you're creating your prompts, and and these rules apply to not just GitHub Copilot, but just generative AI in general, is you want to be as descriptive and specific as possible. If you're going to be vague, you're not necessarily going to get a clear and a good answer. So use very clear and precise language. Include your relevant details about the function and any expected behavior. If possible, surround your questions with relevant code snippets. So provided the guide on what you're looking for, a sample, working sample. Um, and then we really explain the purpose and the expected functionality. Um, and then if you don't be discouraged if you don't get the right results the first time around. Iterate it, retry it. That's the best suggestion. You're not with good GitHub Copilot actually does a pretty good job. If you highlight a code and ask you to just uh, expand on it based on your user requirements, it does a pretty good job at it. Actually, has used it this today to write or update a stored procedure for me, and it did an amazing job in first try. But I just have to be very specific on what I'm looking for. So I said my prompt was, for example, um, I told ChatGPT to first, when this gets GitHub Copilot, actually, I use ChatGPT because it was a stored procedure. Um, but again, same concept applies. So I told it to just first read the code, understand it well, and then I told I'm going to ask them, give it more requirements to update it. So then I provide my clear requirements, and then it actually updated the store procedure and saves me a lot of time because it was a very large store procedure. But AI did a great job, and something that probably take me at least 4 hours. I got it done in, I want to say, 10 minutes. So again, don't be discouraged if you don't get the right answer. Iterate, refine, and then your results will improve. And the last but not least, make sure you break down complex problems. Ask more simpler. If it's a complex problem, try to break it down to smaller tasks, and then you're gonna get much better results. If you're gonna feed a lot of information when asking for results, AI sometimes get confused, or I don't know what's the word, it seems to get lazy and it starts skipping some details. So you have to be very specific, and then move on to the next task. So are there any limitations? Yes. in my opinion, if you're using for writing code, you still need a senior person to be able to manage, review, and ask the right questions. A lot of times I've seen AI can generate code which doesn't even make sense. Uh, what I mean by that is it creates code that doesn't even exist. It creates its own hypothetical libraries and functions. And when if you so it did once time I got really confused because I had never seen it. So when I Googled directly on Microsoft website, I realized that that was not true. So there are times when you have to be careful. That's why I think you have to be very specific. I think GitHub Copilot does a better job. It doesn't hallucinate as compared to if you use like ChatGPT directly. Um, so yeah, so what I mean is you still need experienced people to be able to review the results uh, to maintain the quality of the application. Um, and just be aware of security and privacy, right? So make sure um, make sure that um, just assume that when you're using these tools, your data you're sending could be used for learning purposes. Um, I covered a lot of information, so before we go into manual or the testing area, I just want to pause if there are any questions.
Not a um, question, but a comment. And you
Mhm.
have more experience than I do. But I did want to share, I did a little bit of using
Mhm.
Copilot and ChatGPT for some coding and some test case generation myself.
Sure.
And one thing I found, and you said this also earlier, and for anyone that uses AI in any form, it's very coachable, right? So at first I asked it to generate some code or to review some code or create some test cases, and I wasn't happy with the first results or they didn't work. But as I told it in the session saying, hey, this is what I found or this is what I didn't like, I was very impressed at how it could ultimately get to the right answer, right? So it was just more reaffirmation that AI is very dialogue based and very trainable. And when I gave it observations of what it generated, what I liked and didn't like, I got a much better product. So I wouldn't get discouraged on the first pass. I would continue to
Exactly.
train it and
Yeah.
coach it. And it doesn't take offense, which is nice. You can say, I don't like that. And it doesn't come,
No.
I you know,
Yeah, it's a I'm glad you mentioned that. It's also even apologize sometimes. Oh, I apologize. I missed that, right? I apologize. I led you in the wrong direction. But yes, I think that's where if you provide an example, then it knows better. So the more you make it guess, that's where things get somewhat problematic. So yeah, definitely very good, great point there. Okay. Anyway, so let's move on to test cases, or rather the manual test cases creation. So in the field of software quality assurance, right, the creating test cases is a cornerstone for dependable and exact outcomes. So this process ensures that our solutions not only meet the requirements that we talked about earlier, right, user requirements, but also it delivers the quality that users demand. And creating manual test cases, in my opinion, actually is a big bottleneck in a lot of projects. Face it all the time, where we have the requirements, but when we finish the development, but we don't have enough QA team members who can write effective test cases, or if they may be spread thin across multiple projects, so they just don't have enough time to write quality test plans and test cases. So uh, manual test case is easier said than done because it's a very lengthy process, right? You have to first review all the documentation. You have to review all the requirements. It's called requirements analysis. Then you have to create a test case design that determines really the scope of testing, identifying all the test condition, inputs, expected outcomes. Then you, of course, have to write those test cases um, in whatever tool you use, whether it's Jira or whatnot. with your objectives, preconditions, outline the steps, expected results, post conditions, and then it goes through a review with all the stakeholders and developers, all the team members. After that, you have to manage those test case execution and then analyze the results of those test cases. And last but not least, if something changes, you have to go back and maintain those. And that's if if even if a small change in the user story, you have to go back and update those test cases so that they remain relevant as requirements change. So what I'm trying to say is a very time-consuming process. So anything we can do to speed up the process is very helpful. So how can we use AI, right, for that? And what are the benefits for it? So which listed on the slide, right, really improves your efficiency and consistency. You can modify test case on the fly to reflect the current state of your product. So easily modifiable. You're going to be more efficient, right? Increase efficiency. You can cover all functional areas that sometimes humans might overlook, but AI will not, most likely. And then in this space, at least in the test case creation, there are actually tools that integrate nicely with project management tools such as Jira. I think Jira is the most commonly used project management tool, so it's nice to have these tools that work directly with Jira. So let's briefly talk about these. Just want to keep a check on the time. Pat, how are we doing on the time? We got about 15 minutes?
Yeah, we're fine, actually. We
Okay.
can go 20 or 30 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, I think
I'm
yeah, I think I don't need more than 15. We're just going to talk about
That's great.
automated, and then we'll talk about the automation a little bit.
Okay, all good.
Okay. So there are three tools here. I would add one more to it. We'll talk about it in the end. But Catalan on the left is a test management solution. It has a GPT-powered manual test generation, and it uses GPT to analyze your requirements and generate comprehensive and tailored sets of manual tests. Um, the only thing to watch out for this, that at least when I'm playing around with it, that is I struggle with a little bit because it really depends on a catalog platform itself. So if you don't have a catalog suite of products already, then this tool is not for you. Otherwise, it's a pretty nice tool. The one on the far right, Tricentis Test Management for Jira. The way it works, again, it's a test automation that works directly in Jira. So it's a plugin for Jira. You install it and start using it. And it's really nice because you can link it to your requirements, and it can really create it understands your requirements, and then with a single click, it can generate your test steps. Excuse me. So the result is a finished test case, including your preconditions that are inserted into correct order into your test suite. So I like playing around with it. It's a nice tool, and they always have new features coming out. The only thing is that it's only available for Jira Cloud environment. It's not available for the on-premise environment. There's third tool add to the list. I didn't have a chance to add to the slide. I recently looked into it or explored it. It's the very popular plugin for Jira called Zapier. So Zapier, a lot of you might have heard of it, just because it's so popular. They also have very nice. I think a couple of months ago they released some very nice AI tools as well. Again, very similar to what Tricentis Catalan does, but for Zapier, really helps you generate those test cases automatically. And as your requirements change, you can go back and readjust them. And then last but not least, ChatGPT again. Same concepts apply here, right? really the same principles that guided the creation of user stories apply here, right? You have to be precise, you have to be relevant, and you have to provide the context. If you do that, you're going to get very good results. Yes, you might say yes, not specialized test management tools like Zapier or TTM for Jira, but what I like is its conversational style and ability to remember context. I think it more than makes up for that, for the lack of specialization. So I can show this one example here. I think I have one. So again, using this kind of like a homegrown framework. So in this case, it's a tag framework. So applying the similar prompt engineering framework, a different one for generating test cases. So in this case, task is you define your task, action, again, like you state the action, and then provide any guidance for the AI. The example would be, in the case of test cases, the task is you want to develop a comprehensive test plan and the corresponding test cases. Very simple, right? Again, these are all simple examples that you can further enhance depending on your scenarios. The action would be the test cases should specifically address each of the following, right? Functionality, right? For example, verify all the features of the shopping cart operate correctly across different devices and browsers. You want to have usability features, and you also want to have accessibility features. On the guidance part of this framework, you can say for each test cases, I want to include a clear description of the test case. What are the steps to execute the test case? What are going to be the expected result? And any prerequisites I need before I run this test step. So with this fairly simple prompt, and honestly very generic prompt, because I want to keep it generic just for an example, you get pretty decent results, right? You get a test case about add to cart functionality, very clear description, and very clear steps on how to test that feature, and then follow the expected result, right? You select a product with correct options, it's added to shopping cart, and the cart icon is displayed an updated item count. It added a criteria for failure because I asked for it, and any prerequisites setup we could think that we need. I mean, fairly nice, you would say, right? For something that if you're starting out for your testers, they can use as a very nice starting point, and then they can elaborate and fine tune it as needed for your project. Another example is just randomly I picked some test cases. Yeah, it did actually create, AI came up with quite a few. Of course, I cannot fit all of them in this presentation, but there's another one where this is about accessibility of shopping cart, right? It's accessible according to the WCAG guidelines. And a lot of times humans might miss some of these requirements, but AI is smart enough to, based on its experience, to provide how to test that, what is expected result. Having things like screen reader, voice commands should work without issues. All interactive elements should be reachable or operable through keyboard, which is the word. And visual elements adhere to different contrast standards. So a lot of time humans are not very well trained to create stories like that. So I think it's very helpful to cover all these scenarios. Okay. So again, same thing that I mentioned earlier, that as with user stories, test cases that are generated, excuse me, the test cases that are generated by AI, they're not the final edict, but they're more of a starting point, right? You still need a discerning eye and almost like expert, right, in this area to refine and adapt them according to your specific requirements of the project. And really, it's a collaboration between human expertise and AI suggestions. But really, if you incorporate this process in the development process early, it can really speed up the development of those test cases. It really saves you a lot of time and also managing those test cases once they're created. At the end of the day, you are defining potential issues earlier, right? Before they become costly errors. So that's the brief intro to manual testing. Automated testing, to be honest, I'm not a QA specialist, but it's something that I've briefly explored. We have some other team members who have played around with these tools a lot more than I have, but so I'll just cover based on my information and a couple of tools that I personally have played around with. So automated tools, I mean, it's a very saturated market. There are a lot of tools, and they all claim to use AI in one shape, so some shape or another. Really, they enhance your testing efficiency by using AI-powered tool to speed up the creation of test scenarios. They leverage intelligent algorithms to analyze essentially the user interaction with different screens for more comprehensive testing, and has some visual verification um, capabilities to detect UI discrepancies by comparing different screenshots against baseline. Um, so let's show some of these that we looked into. Um, so, these are just some examples. Like I said, it's a very saturated market. There are a lot of tools in this space. Functionize on the left is a Chrome plugin, and it's really helps you create smart test cases using machine learning with capabilities like natural language processing and test generation. It has a browser-based execution. Um, it's and it's a nice tool for test management, defect tracking, and even integration with various DevOps tools. All of these tools have something they call, I think, self-healing or smart locators, depending on the tool. They have different names for it. Essentially, what it is the self-healing is essentially something that test that evolves with the application. So if something changes, like an icon or button changes in application, the test can fix itself, which is pretty amazing. And Functionalize, I think, also has some enterprise capabilities for some better deployment options and single sign-on and so on and so forth. So Tricentis is more of a AI-based functional test automation. So it has a record and playback tool that create tests as you interact with the UI. And it can really, as you interact with the UI, can create those test cases for you. Tons of functionality built out of the box, simple to add, like validations, hover stops, so on and so forth. I think they have something called smart locators, which I think is the same thing as self-healing that Functionize and Apply tool call, which is essentially uses AI to what is it? Like analyze hundreds of element attributes. So it just allow the test to be, less breakable, I guess. Apply tools, again, similar features. I think this is one of the tools that has lot of additional features. Um, Again, self-healing test, visual AI integration, and smart test creation and maintenance. Same goes for Catalan and Selenium. I think Catalan and Selenium has a little bit less features than the first three we covered here. So yeah, a lot of tools, a lot of features, and they all have AI capabilities to really make this test automation easier and less painful. The only thing to watch out with these tools is these tools do tend to get they don't come cheap, and especially for scriptless automation and the visual verification tools. And the installation for this tool is somewhat complex. Um, So as far as say you like some of these areas, right? And you're curious on how to get started, right? Some of you are already obviously playing around with this, and you have a decent idea what these tools can do, and what are the capabilities are. Um, but really, this is kind of like our approach for not just for AI, but some other, whenever you want to implement a new technology or new areas, is so in this case, a successful AI adoption in your software development lifecycle is generally structured into phases, right? You want to start small, so that's what we call crawl. Find let's say a small group and specific use for a project. Excuse me. You decide or define how you're going to measure success. Set the time frame for the project, whatever it is, month, 2 months, 3 months, and then make sure it follows your privacy and usage rules. And then you just kick off the project, start the project, and based on the results, you make the go no go decision. Say the project goes well, you want to expand, then you go to the walk stage and you expand the project to more people. Now you might involve more thought leaders, more, spread the word, right? Involve more experts, and then keep checking and measuring project progress, right? Generally, it's 3 or more sprints to measure the progress, and then you adjust the project based on the result as needed, whether you start, stop, or slow down, right? And then run, everything is running, and then you just want to, update the project's guideline, SOPs. You want to do the continuous measurement, monitoring, observing, and adjust as needed. Um, and then you can repeat the process for each new use of each project or each new tool, right? So that's kind of give you an idea how you can start using these tools. Or the way I see it, forget about all this, right? All this fancy verbiage. Just start using these tools. And once you start using it, then you get an idea of what it can or can't do as you play around with it. If you don't use it, you're never going to learn, right? So if you start using it, play around, then you will know, okay, you know, some of the things that are described, right? So I've been using it for, I would say a year and a half since it first came out, and every time I learn something new. Um, and I try to use it for every time I feel like I'm spending a lot of time. Um, um, I try to use it for any scenario I can think of, and really, the goal is to really be as productive as possible at the end of the day, right? So yeah, the right, and that's about it, right? So I think today we covered a lot of different tools. I mean, I talked a lot, so hopefully there was not too much information, but really show different tools on that we can really make our software development life cycle more productive, enhance productivity, reduce errors, and streamline the development process. Um, and I really encourage everyone to start using these tools in your own area of work, to really get a better feel. Um, so yeah, thank you all for your attention today and your time. Pat, you got a question?
Yes, Adnan. First off, thanks so much for presenting. Yeah, gave us a great overview of utilizing AI tools for improving the SDLC. When you are suggesting to pilot, what is there value to pilot throughout the organization, or just stick with one department or use case?
It's it's a difficult question to answer. It depends on the scenario and what you are trying to use and which tool you're trying to use. But I would say start small, right? Start with one department and learn the tools up. Like I said, we go back to like previous slide, right? Let me see if I can go back here. Essentially, you want to. What I would suggest, set a time frame, right? What is it that you're using the tool for? What are your goals? Set the time frame. If you have any privacy, then look into this. Some of the rules or usage rules, look into those, and then use it for the department or the team, right? One team. And yeah, based on the success, you expand to other departments, I would say.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, go ahead, Tim.
So yeah, and then if anybody has any further questions, my contact information on this last slide. Best way to reach out to me is either through LinkedIn or through my email. So yeah, any questions, anything, just feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Adnan. Thanks again.
Thank you.
I know you were trying to accommodate us to get this in July, and we're grateful.